Good afternoon YouTube and welcome back to the channel. I'm sitting here on the Crinan Canal in Argyll and I'm heading up the coast here through Kilmartin Glen up to the Isle of Seil. Now the Isle of Seil is one of the inner Hebrides islands on the west coast of Scotland. When we get there we need to cross over a bridge called the Atlantic Bridge, or the bridge over the Atlantic. Now that, I know that sounds particularly impressive, but we'll see what we see when we get there. It's forecast that the rain will probably stay off, so I'm hopeful that, you know, I'll get a little bit of rain, but nothing too severe. Anyway, let's go. So we're starting off here in Kilmartin Glen, folks, a place that's hugely important historically in Scotland. Over here on the right hand side, you just see it through the mist, that's the hill fort of Dunad. And up ahead we've got lots of monuments, hundreds of them in fact, standing stones and that type of thing. Now I'm not going to stop and dwell on them because I did a video on this before. We'll skip past a couple of them that are quite nice to look at. We'll take a little bit of a detour around here so that we can have a look at Temple Wood. It's my favourite set of standing stones in this area. Nice place to live, huh? No time with these places, quite a lot of maintenance to, especially to look after these really old buildings. You're not just living in a building, you're trying to preserve it. This is a nature reserve. Of course this whole area here is protected. Amazing. There's more standing stones right here. So this is a Temple Wood car park. If you want to come here, you can park over there and literally see these standing stones and walk through the field. But there's hundreds of these dotted around this landscape. And some of them date back thousands and thousands of years. Look at this cairn as well, it's a burial cairn. Dunad Fortress behind me, that's where the kings of the Scots, the Dalriada, used to be crowned, on top of this hill. Ooh, wild! A bit of wind and rain. It's nice to be back on the bike though, I must admit. We've got Ardfern over here on this bay. It's a lovely ride out there as well. You can ride off, it's a little, once you get past this village, it's a little single track lane. It goes all the way to the peninsula. You see people camping and stuff out there. Really nice. It's nice little cafes and stuff there as well in Ardfern. Somebody's farm. Waterfall in the garden. You're waking up to that every morning. Look at this, wow, talk about remote. A few years back guys, I used to live in a city in China. A city called Chongqing in Sichuan province. Now that city was so big that it was essentially its own municipality. It had a population of over 30 million people. So I used to travel all over China actually, and I used to like getting out of the city, and quite often I used to fly over to Hong Kong. Now Hong Kong is one of my favourite places in the whole world. Now in Hong Kong they built a bridge from Hong Kong over to the mainland across the Pearl River Delta, you know, over to Zhuhai and Macau. And that bridge is the longest over water crossing in the world. And here in Scotland we're not crossing the Pearl River Delta today. We're crossing the Atlantic Ocean across the Atlantic Bridge. To say that the weather has turned is a little bit of a gross understatement. Good old Scotland, I have to say. Anyway, we're nearly there, we're nearly at this island. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Atlantic Bridge. Believe it or not, this is actually the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful. Let's park up, have a look. And now we're on an island. This is the Clachan Bridge, the bridge over the Atlantic, or the Atlantic Bridge. And admittedly, it only crosses a tiny little part of the Atlantic here, as you can see. The bridge here was built in 1791. Now that would be after the Jacobite Uprising. Now the reason I mention that is this island here, the Isle of Seil, used to be a little bit of a stronghold for the Jacobites. And when the men crossed back over onto the island here, back then they would need to do it on boats. As soon as they got on the island, they would get out of their trousers and back into their kilts, because at that time the kilts had been made illegal. Yeah, but over here on the island, you know, there was no government troops here to tell them they couldn't do it. This is a potato spinner, would have been pulled by horses. You see the end here, that was used for harvesting potatoes. It would literally pull them up out of the earth. Now, I'm not entirely sure which building it is, but I believe it might be this one, but whichever building was the old inn, as soon as the Jacobites came across the water here onto the island, we're talking about 1745 here, we go into the inn, and that's where their kilts were kept. So get the trousers off, straight back into the kilts, and back to normal Highland life. Let's go and explore this little island, see what else we can see. Wildlife, whale and whirlpool boat trips. That must be to the Corryvreckan whirlpool. Oh, that's interesting. Tesco delivery driver. Oh, look at these little buildings. The golf course. Now, this is interesting. If you look over here, you'll see this. This gives us a clue as to the history of these islands. These are known as the Slate Islands. So they're part of the inner Hebrides group here in Scotland. So you've got Seil, just south of here you've got Long, and then over on the right hand side you've got a tiny little island called Easdale. And we're going to go and have a look at that in a minute. There's a shop. That's handy. Get in there and get a drink actually on the way back. Wow, beautiful. This will be the ferry over to Long, which is that big island over there. I say big. Wow. Wow, what a place. Look at the slate here. So folks, as you can see, especially in this weather, this is as Wild West Scotland as you can possibly imagine. Now when you come onto the Isle of Seil here and you start to head south, you quite quickly realise that the landscape here on these islands are really quite different from the landscape on the mainland just a few miles away. When you look on Google Maps, for example, it looks like there's little sort of sinkholes, little lakes dotted around, but when you see how sort of square they are, you can tell that, you know, they're not natural. And that's largely because of what the islands are made of. As I mentioned earlier, these are known as the Slate Islands, and everywhere you look, there's Slate. And if we look behind us here, you can see just how rugged the land is. We know that there was slate taken from these islands as early as the 1500s, but not commercially. They weren't commercially mined up until the 17th century. Now, mining came to an abrupt halt here in the 1880s when there was a huge Atlantic storm, breached the walls of the quarries. Pretty much all of them were completely flooded. Now think about how deep these are. These are 300 feet deep. Now this is certainly not somewhere you would want to be when the ocean comes rushing in, that's for sure. And this is a fine example, and they're all over the place. And in particular on this little island behind us here, this is Easdale Island. And Easdale slate was actually world renowned for its quality.
First stop on a culinary odyssey is Easdale, on the rugged west coast. Look at this. Gentlemen, welcome. Wow.
You'll find Easdale slate all over what essentially used to be the British Empire, from Canada to New Zealand. Now this little island of Easdale is about 600 metres by 400 metres across, and the hill on there is about 122 feet high. Now believe it or not, at its height, when it was being mined in its heyday, there was over 500 people living on that tiny little rock over here. There's a little office here. You can still actually get across here, but you need to leave your bike or your vehicle, because there's no way to get a mechanised vehicle onto this island. The transport they use on this island is wheelbarrows. I'm not about to go and get a boat over to Easdale. It's going to be dark in about 10 minutes. But believe it or not, this little island across here is still world famous, and it's world famous for one thing. Hundreds of people come here every single year to try their hand at becoming world champion stone skimmer. Apparently it's not how many times the stone skips across the water, it's how far it travels. I'm not about to become a world champion stone skimmer anytime soon, but it seems like a lot of fun. And it's as good a reason as any, I suppose, to come to this group of tiny little rocks here poking out into the Atlantic Ocean.